weapon will prosper. No enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. But as I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. At least you're in Central Time or Eastern, further east. That we welcome you to our Monday Pipeline Report here on the 21st day of April 2025. Pastor Tim Karskadden here. Zach Karskadden will be joining me here in just a minute as we come to you each Monday and share the prophetic insight we're receiving from the Lord, and just to vet the news for you, what you need to be paying attention to, praying into, partnering with the Lord concerning the events of the world, and especially America. That's our main focus here. This is where this ministry started, was to pray for the office of president. That we continue to do. The reason we call it Pipeline, if you're new to us, is I had a dream, and a gentleman, I dreamed he worked on the pipeline, and I knew it meant that once we spread the word down the pipeline, it would reach to the body of Christ, and we would all engage. That's what a pipeline does. You put oil or water or whatever in it, and it goes to a destination. And I want it to go to you and to your prayer warriors and to all those that are standing on the wall for America in this hour, and to pray God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I welcome each and every one of you from all around the country. Thanks again, you faithful ones that just keep coming every week. We're so thankful for you. I have my Shreveport shirt on today, praying for our city revival here as well. If you don't know about our city, we're in the northwest part of Louisiana, up in the corner. We're near Arkansas and Texas, not too far from Oklahoma. We're up there in the corner, and we love this region because God called us here, and we have a prophetic purpose in the earth, and we're so thankful for God's call to us to be here. That's why we come from this place. And again, I'm looking at all your locations. Again, thank you for those in our region, but also those outside. Good to see you, Greg, from Tennessee. He's faithful to be on every live stream he can be. We appreciate that, and all you others as well. Georgina and John and all the others, Danielle. We just thank you that you're there every week and putting your comments. That really means a lot to us. Please share these as you always do. And we want others to be informed. We were trying to get an audience of people that will stay on the wall for our nation in this hour. So that's the focus. We got a lot to cover today, a lot of events going on. Before I get started, in yesterday's meeting, our service, our resurrection service yesterday, which was amazing, by the way. The worship was just incredible. Prophetic was flowing. We were really able to help a lot of people walk and get healed and do some other things that God gave us a word about, testimonies. But in the service during worship, I had a vision, and I saw the enemy really pushing hard against us. I talked about it on my podcast today. But as I saw this, I saw these court cases, especially these ones we're talking about today, the immigration and all these other court cases that we're going to be talking about. And I saw the injustices and the atrocities that are happening through these court cases, not just here, but also in the rest of the world. And I just saw the Lord push back against that, pushback. And then I heard the word hosts are being released. Heavenly hosts are being released to battle with us concerning that. And we'll start having some more golden court cases. That's what we're believing for. And the scripture I want to declare with this is Isaiah 64, where we're to pray this prayer. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains would quake, that might quake at your presence, as fire kindles the brushwood, and the fire causes water to boil, to make your name known to your adversaries, that the nations may tremble at your presence. And that's what really we're asking for, God to rend the heavens and let the adversaries know that the Lord is rising up, and in this hour, and his name will be known, and the host of heaven will come and partner with us. Now we're in that window, and I did my whole podcast on it today. I encourage you to listen to it. We're in that 30-day window that Chuck Pierce prophesied about from April 20 to May 20, where we'll see more visitations, more encounters. I got the word open heavens, and that's what I did my podcast on today. And I described biblically what an open heaven is. It is a frame of time where God speaks clearly on issues. And right now we need clarity on these battles that we're going through right now. I think it's very, very important for us to have that clarity. And the Lord is willing to visit us in this hour and speak to us about those issues. So as always, we try to start with Israel first and making sure that America is in alignment with Israel, covenant Israel. I remind you all the time, we say it that way. Not political Israel. Uh, it's very important that you make sure that you make a dividing line there, because otherwise you're going to fall into a trap of supporting just political Israel. I realize we have to have political Israel to maintain the land, and it's just like we have to have American government and to maintain our land. But the covenant that God made with Israel and the people of God is the most important thing. Now, recently, President Trump appointed Governor Huckabee from Arkansas to be the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, which is an unusual pick. He's a evangelical, loves Israel. He's not Jewish, so there's a lot of things that are very unusual. But this is the thing that I think is beautiful. He represents us as in our faith, but he also understands the covenant of Israel that God made with these people. And he was invited by the president Herzog of Israel to do a joint press conference. And I want to play his just a small portion of what Governor Mike Huckabee, said during his time at this speech. But I think it's very powerful. Listen to what he had to say.
Mr. President, it was 52 years ago this summer that I made my first trip to this magnificent place. I fell in love with Israel as a 17-year-old wild-eyed boy, amazed that I was actually standing in the land of the Bible. It overwhelmed me. Now I come back as a wild-eyed old man, but still with a sense of absolute joy and an overwhelming sense of awe that I'm in a land that God himself said, "This is mine, and these are my people." I come to stand today with the state of Israel and with the Jewish people because I believe that it is not simply a geopolitical position, but a divine position. And over the 52 years that I've been coming to Israel countless times and bringing tens of thousands of people to see this magnificent land, I love to see it myself, but I love to see it through the eyes of people who are here for the first time. And I watch the emotion. I see the tears that flow because they're walking land that they have read about, that they have prayed for, that they have thought about and never imagined they would be here. I stand here today fighting back tears because I am here, not just as a visitor, but now for the next few years, unless the president tweets something early in the morning and tells me to come home, this will be my home for the next 4 years. And Janet and I come with an extraordinary sense of awe and wonder and deep gratitude to President Trump for giving us this extraordinary privilege. I'm grateful that you acknowledged, Steph.
And that's, boy, I couldn't have said it any better. If I was in his position, I would have said almost the same thing he said, because, as he said, it's not a geopolitical issue. It is a covenant issue with the Lord and the land, and he covenanted with the land. Um, that he has a purpose for those people in this day, in this hour, and right now, if you're watching all these protests around the world, pro Palestine, pro Hamas, they are hijacking in America the anti-Trump um, protests that you're seeing in the streets. So we had some this past weekend, thousands of people. Which, by the way, these protests do nothing. They do not. I've been on the other side where we're protesting at things in Washington, and they don't move the needle. They're great for for Facebook and for news clips and all, but they don't really move a politician. And I've been in the politicians' offices when the crowds are outside; it doesn't move them. Um, I just say that because don't get alarmed that you see thousands of people protesting, but they have been hijacked by the pro-Hamas community. And if you watch, most of the crowds are waving Palestinian flags. Many of the protesters, I don't want to say most, but many of them are bussed in, paid to be there. I've watched testimonies of people that were paid, young, especially young white college students who need money. They need money for food and housing, whatever, and they're told what to do, what not to say. They give them posters to hang, and they don't even know. If you watch some of the interviews when they go into the crowd and say, "What are you fighting against?" They don't even know. They ask them, "What does it mean from the river to the sea?" They don't know which river. They don't know which sea. So that's why it's a sham. But I want to say this with all sincerity, even though I think those are not effective for what they're trying to do. It is beginning to create a sentiment in the world, an anti-Semitic movement that against the Jewish people, and you're starting to see a hatred toward Jews start to grow worldwide, which is all prophetic at some level because it's going to cause many of them to go back home. I saw a clip from I think it was Norway this weekend, and they were hanging Nazi flags on interstates, and they were pulled down eventually. But this is a kind of movement we're starting to see across the world, and some of this has to happen. But it's a real issue that I think we need to be praying into and praying about. Now, um, recently, we're seeing the negotiations America's having with Iran concerning the nuclear deal. This is a little bit different. Zach, if you want to come in and comment on this, you can. This is a big issue. We have sent a negotiator named Witkoff, Mr. Witkoff, from President Trump in Europe, and they're beginning to discuss this Iran treaty. I am not impressed with his work on this issue. The fact that you're negotiating with a known terrorist who has, for me, because I've lobbied on the Iran nuclear deal since Obama's years. I've gone to Congress, I've talked to senators. Never, as far as I can remember, were they ever faithful to anything they agreed to. They would bend the rules all the time, breaking the rules, not allowing inspectors in, doing things behind the scenes, producing missiles they weren't supposed to produce. And they just can't be trusted. I mean, that's the ultimate thing. They're not allowing Rubio. The Iranians do not want Rubio, Secretary of State, to be there because they know his pro-Israel stance and they know his biblical Christian value stance concerning Israel. So they'd rather talk to a pragmatic person like Witkoff, who's a secular Jew, who is a negotiator and somehow has a pie in the sky belief system, if you ask me, that somehow they're going to adhere to some nuclear deal. The violations of the original one, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which they have proven over and over again, they failed to fulfill its obligations. This started in 2015. The nuclear weapons program was born in secrecy. in violation of that treaty. And to this day, Iran has never come clean about the extent of the nuclear efforts. After 2015, the Iran deal was in place. Israel uncovered the Iranian nuclear archives, providing concrete proof, evidence that Iran had lied to the inspectors and had failed to disclose multiple nuclear sites. And under the nuclear deal, the Iran nuclear deal, Iran was able to continue its program to cheat and ultimately to move closer to a nuclear bomb. And that Iran conducted research and advanced centrifuges outside the bounds of that agreement and with no consequences. And the International Atomic Agency blindly closed the file on the possible military dimension of that Iran nuclear program, despite knowledge of Iran's files, highlighting the inability of the international inspectors to hold Iran accountable. And one more point, to this day, Iran has not revealed the locations of key nuclear equipment used in the weaponization experiments. Okay, so this is a threat to all of us, to all the Americans as well as Israel. This aggression has increased. And this man, Witkoff, who President Trump has sent over there, is negotiating with this community on this issue.
Yeah, key point. Israel knows, Netanyahu knows, Witkoff is kind of the mediator in this, and we titled it today Mediator-in-Chief rather than like Commander-in-Chief. Is Trump right now on several fronts is having to be a mediator. And if you remember back to his first term, everybody was worried, that a crazy man, Donald Trump, would be able to have nuclear codes and start World War III. Well, he's the only one on the international stage trying to prevent World War III from occurring. And the Trump administration has a problem. We talked about this before, in a sense of there's leaks out of the Department of Defense and the military. Israel believes and is stating that it comes from the likes of Tulsi Gabbard, Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan types, who are pressuring not to go to war. They hold a more libertarian, isolationist point of view, and they're good for certain things and they're good to hear out on certain issues. But this is one where you kind of have to play your cards. And Trump has come out and said, look, there is, and he said this publicly on Fox News. He said, if there is no peace deal, if there is no elimination of Iran's nuclear program, then there will be weaponization and an attack on Iran and their nuclear sites where Israel and international agencies know. And look at what's happening in Yemen to know that Trump will mean what he says. He's not afraid to attack, and what his attacks are doing in Yemen are strategically breaking down the Houthis' leadership there, and now there's an uprising and possible needed civil war there for freedom for that country. But Trump has said that, but I want to bring this point out is Daily Wire pointed this out. I'll share this here. And they did a good analysis of what kind of has taken place over this weekend of the first round of negotiations with the Witkoff and the team there. Is they pointed this out, is in the original JCPOA, the original Iran nuclear deal negotiated by the Obama administration, that in the contract that they stated that Iran was only left room to enrich uranium up to 3.67%. Let's go down and see, even in international terms, they are definitely at 60% and upwards to 90% uranium enrichment levels, which are considered weapons grade, i.e. nuclear weapons grade level weapons. This is publicly known. And this is a report from a February report of this year from an International Atomic Energy Agency, that this is where they're currently at. And obviously you could say, well, the Trump administration backed out of that deal. That's absolutely correct. But the issue here is that Iran said, oh, we only want these for civilian purposes, for energy, et cetera, things like that. Well, if that was your purpose, then why would you go to 60 to 90% weapons grade uranium? So there's some issues there. And what it looks like Trump is doing is he's trying to negotiate. He's going to give them an opportunity to negotiate. But he said, now he hasn't stated publicly what the timeline is. He has said on interviews and publicly to the press that there will be a cutoff time. And just like if you saw last week with Rubio coming out, and Trump backs Rubio on this, which is why he put Rubio in this position, is that if Ukraine and Russia don't come to a deal, if they're going to continue to stall, the U.S. is going to back out. And then it's going to allow Russia to go in and be more aggressive. And it's going to force Ukraine to come to the table and concede some things. Is yes, they've done a good job of for Ukraine of defending themselves, but from what standpoint? Is because the U.S. has been funding them. And so President Trump saying, okay, this is enough of this. And on the Iranian front, how much rope is he going to give Witkoff, et cetera, things like that. And the parties involved from the Iranian side are the same parties that were involved in the original JCPOA deal, Iran nuclear deal talks. So they're used to this. And there's a report out of Iran. There's a video clip from an Iranian, basically Senate member, is how you would call it. And he basically said Iran must build nuclear weapons for deterrence purposes. Nuclear technology will place Iran on equal footing in negotiations. So they know in order to have equal footing in these negotiations, they're going to have to get to that point. So if they're coming out strong, that might mean they think that they're capable of using these, and they would be open to an attack possibly. Now, going back to the leaks, this is kind of a bigger issue here on the home front. Something kind of needs to be prayed about. Obviously, there have been firings last week from people who've been known to have leaked. The issue is that a Wall Street Journal report where they talked about the leaks, there were talks of a kind of covert operation to attack Iranian nuclear facilities. Well, that puts American troops at risk. That puts Israeli troops at risk if they were to go to attack. But then also is, okay, let's say Iran takes this, if it's false, this false report, whether it's true or false, it's still yet to be determined. If it's this false report, now let's say Iran takes that as a point of aggression. Oh, you're planning this. Well, let us go attack your troops, say in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, elsewhere. U.S. troops. Now that puts U.S. troops at risks. And so there's an issue that we need to pray for within this administration for sealed lips, because these people kind of need to keep their mouth shut, to let the military kind of work these things out and trust that Trump, the commander-in-chief, can be mediator-in-chief and hopefully try his best to prevent World War III from occurring.
Yes, and the administration is somewhat divided on this topic. His administration is, and that's why the negotiations are occurring. And this is where you elect a president, that he has to make these tough decisions, and we need to pray for him. That's what this pipeline report's about. Is we want to pray for him that he'd have the wisdom what to do when you got a divided council around you, which he does. He's got some people say, "Hey, let's negotiate," and other people say, "Hey, let's take him out militarily." And you got those two different points of view. It's pretty much all there is, because I don't think there's a mixture of that. Historically, America has always stopped. Israel's been trying to take care of this back from the days of President Bush Jr. And America has stopped them over and over again, which the New York Times report said they did recently, is that Israel was about to take it out and they stopped it. Now, whether that report's true or not, but this was what plagued President Trump's first term, was these leaks that were coming out of the administrative offices, and it was coming out of the Department of Defense as well. You see the Hedgesmith is the battle he's going through right now, because of these leaks that are going on. Now, I'll say this from being in this world, the lobbying world on this issue, some of these leaks are intentional. So you got to hear the Holy Spirit for us, which ones are intentional and which ones are not. I think on this one, I don't think it was intentional. I think Zach made a good point there that this puts everybody at danger, especially if they already had plans of doing things. And now you've alerted the enemy of what's about to happen or what could have happened. So let's just pray for wisdom that he's going to have to make a decision here. And I think Zach laid it out very well. If the negotiations go to the wrong direction, the military will have to be exercised here. And the Iran's plan, as it's always been, and the Prince of Persia, if you want to look at the spirit behind it, is to delay in the hopes that a Democrat would come back into office, which they know. We saw this with Obama and Biden. They had free reign to continue terrorism, grow their proxies in the region, and then grow their nuclear program. I mean, they just had it all. When they say, and I think this is where I wish some more counsel would come to the president, that they need this for nuclear energy, for electricity and all. The last estimate of the Iran's oil reserves was they have 200 years available oil for the nation. 200 years. So that's a long time. They do not need nuclear energy right now. This is where you got to see through the veil here and see what actually is going on behind the scenes. They have another plan there. So we want to make sure that we pray accordingly on that issue. Okay, let's shift topics here a little bit. We want to talk about the Supreme Court issues with the immigration problem that President Trump's having to deal with. If you saw recently this weekend, I think it was, Supreme Court ruled 7-2 at midnight to stop the deportation of the Venezuelans from the gang from Venezuela, as well as the other gangs from the 13 gangs and so forth. There was on Fox News this weekend just talking about the Supreme Court decisions that are happening. I think you need to hear Turley talks about this. I think it's really important. This is from a Rumble report, but let's play this.
In some, literally in the middle of the night, the court issued unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving the lower courts a chance to rule, without hearing from the opposing party, within 8 hours of receiving the application with dubious factual support for its order, and without providing any explanation for its order. So he thinks the court got it wrong.
Yeah, what Justice Alito is objecting to is that this is becoming increasingly improvisational. I mean, that, you've covered the Supreme Court for years, as I have, and we rarely see this level of our number of emergency cases going in front of the Supreme Court. And a lot of them are half-baked in the sense that they simply don't have the normal details, the record that you have. And the justices are expressing their frustration. Previously, they expressed frustration for the district courts. In the case of Judge Bosberg, they said, what's this doing in your court? This is a habeas case that belongs down south. And I think that they're showing some of that frustration. I think all parties should take heed of that. I think going to the Fourth Circuit decision, the Trump administration should not be alienating Chief Justice Roberts and others. They need to tone down this language a bit. But in the same way, a lot of these challengers are bringing these cases fast and furious to the court. And what Alito is saying is, what are we basing our decision on? These things are coming to us with virtually.
And I think that's an important point there. They're bringing these cases and they're winning. I mean, the Supreme Court's not helping in some of these cases here. This was a temporary ruling. Let me make it clear here. It wasn't a permanent ruling. The Trump administration feels like they can come back with some other cases to deal with this. So I'm hoping that will happen there. But I think he made a strong point here. Look, these Supreme Court justices, because they have lifetime appointments and they are the supreme ones, as they call themselves, they have egos that are pretty large. And pushing them back, which the Trump administration has done some, has to be done with some wisdom here, because you don't want to push so hard that they bow up on you and start fighting you. And I think that's the balance that they have to have. I think he should honor the court. And this is one of those things I've learned in lobbying. You can't go in there and tell that senator or that congressperson that they're wrong and that they need to listen to you. You just can't do that, because they have a position and that puts them on defense, and then they tend to veer off what is the right thing to do. So here we need wisdom here. Justice Alito here was pointing out the fact that these cases that are being brought before them are not validated. They're not, when the ACLU said we need to stop these deportations, they didn't have the proof to say that they should be stopped. So that's where you have a thing that, like you said, is come before the court before they should come before the court. And so this is where we need these golden court cases right now, in the midst of this, so that we don't have these type of rulings. He needs the executive privilege to get the illegals out of our country, especially these gang members. And that's what the people voted for, but that's what the Constitution allows. So I think that it's a twofold thing. If the people voted for it, it's not constitutional. It really doesn't matter. You don't want to supersede the Constitution, but the Constitution does give him the authority to do this. All enemies, foreign and abroad, I mean, foreign and domestic. And these are domestic enemies of the state of America. And we have to have, and he has to have the right to send them back to their countries or where they came from. Okay. I think that's enough on that. Zach, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just one thing. And Tom Homan, and I think this is kind of the clarity on this, is this is what people are forgetting, is in the Alien Enemies Act that Trump is using. The Democrats are saying, well, these illegals need to be allowed due process. These criminals, these gang members who are bringing drugs, crime, etc., things that they're doing into this country, they need to be allowed due process. And Tom Homan points it out. He said, look, these people are criminals. They have no due process allowed in this. And then obviously this is caused by problems from previous Supreme Court cases where they've said that there doesn't need to be due process in this, but it's the issue of, look, this can be solved at the border. This needs to be solved at the border. Okay, you're coming from, international law says you can only seek refuge from the nation closest to you. They're coming from Guatemala, Costa Rica, Venezuela, like they're coming from more than the next country. Like they're coming from further away than Mexico. So
Yeah.
if they're in Venezuela, they need to go to Colombia. If they're Colombia, vice versa, or somewhere Guatemala, somewhere else, Mexico. Like Mexico has to stop this. And so I think that's the issue that needs to be dealt with here. And then obviously the bigger issue, which this applies to all these cases that are here before, that is the actual authority of these lower courts to prevent laws from being implemented that are already on the books, that are passed by Congress. And this is where the Supreme Court has to step up and go back to the Constitution. I think you're right when it comes to President Trump and how he's being robust and bombastic, especially a lot of this administration is. They got to clean that up. A lot of it's due to the type of lawyers that they're using. This is what they do. It works in civil cases. It works in other cases when you're trying to get publicity for your side. But at the end of the day, is you're dealing with the most powerful court in the country. And they're showing that they're not going to be pushed around by the likes of Trump. And we've mentioned this before, but there's something on Amy Coney Barrett. I mentioned to Mildred Bean. She says we need to pray for her, because there's something on her for that very reason. She doesn't want to be pushed around to do what Trump says and what Trump wants. She wants to be looked at as her own individual person. And that was kind of her own thing when she was going through her hearing process. Is you could see that, and you're starting to see that play out, and you saw it play out early on in some of the rulings that she had. And so if the Trump administration could just make their case, not attack, let the other justices attack each other, let them call each other out, and deal with this stuff, so that hopefully there could be some resolution on this to be able to get back to what the Constitution says. And like Alito said here, is doing this in the dead of the night, and not allowing, quote, you're arguing for due process here, Democrats. You're not allowing due process to actually take its case when dealing with this case. You only want to use that argument when it's best for you. And so there's a lot of hypocrisy out here that Alito, and I can guarantee you Thomas, backed wholeheartedly from what Alito said, because they go hand in hand. They agree on a lot of things.
Well, and now this is where we get into what we call a constitutional crisis, because you're starting to see potentially the courts rule against the Constitution, and that's a crisis. And the question is, where do you separate the offices, the executive branch, the congressional and the judicial? How do you separate them all? And when they rule unconstitutionally, what does the Trump administration do? Do they obey the Constitution, or do they obey the court? That's where you have a crisis. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. And this is very dangerous. I know the left had their own QAnon moment yesterday. They kept. I watched some of the crazy videos out there that President Trump on April 20 was going to declare a national emergency and become a dictator and deal with all this immigration stuff. And he's trying to follow the rule of law. And I love it because when I saw QAnon do that on January 6th, said the conservatives were going to do all that. It didn't happen. We've got to learn to stop listening to some of these voices out there that are saying some of this crazy stuff. And I've warned everybody, and I'm probably going to make some people upset. It starts with, I have a friend whose son or daughter is in the military. That's usually how the conversation starts. And then they give you information about what's about to happen. And it almost never happens. And so we got to be careful. That's why we have this pipeline report. We're trying to give you vetted information that you can trust and pray accordingly into that. Okay, that's my little soapbox.
Yeah.
I'll get off of that.
Last thing on this, I think we have to remember what the 1798 Alien Enemies Act was used for. Is it was used for primary purpose for deporting foreign nationals who, when it was considered an invasion. And what Trump's saying is, look, these are Venezuelan Trinidad Arias gang members who are invading, and where they have invaded, they've taken over cities, blocks, councils by weaponry force, military force per se, and even some of the things that they're doing. They're committing crimes against humanity, if you want to go to that level, humanitarian crisis. I mean, they're committing crimes against innocent Americans, most of them women, unfortunately. And Charlie Kirk put out a good point the other day about the time coverage that they've spent on this illegal who got deported to El Salvador, illegal Venezuelan who was here, versus the loss of life from an American who was brutally murdered. And then it was 0 minutes from left-wing news media and over an hour from like ABC, CBS over a week span on this illegal case issue. So they're the focus on the wrong thing. And if there's anything that they want to do, and it's a double-edged sword, is like we want them to focus on the right thing, but at the end of the day, it's like this is just enraging Americans, and hopefully politicians can see this as an opportunity to take back the country in a justified legal way to overturn this ridiculousness, and hopefully for the Democrats themselves to wake up to see this is not the way to go. They're supporting and standing behind illegals who commit crimes and harm innocent Americans, and that's what they're standing for. And Americans have to wake up to that.
Yeah, and
no matter what they do publicly.
Hillary put out a post that she thinks that Democrats, this should be the sword they die on, and that the illegal immigration should be their platform. And so that's what she's doing that for, going after. And hey, I hope it is the sword they die on because it's not worth it. The American people and the Constitution's on our side on this issue. Beth, I see you said Cindy Jacobs. I'm not sure which word. I know she had a recent one. If you have a link there, let us know. We'd like to look at that. And so I think this is one of the strong points of Cindy is on these issues. Now, on the deportation issue, the left, their arguments, and this was an MSNBC report about their fears about immigration. Now, this is unfounded, but this is where the left is coming from. And I want you to hear some of their point of view on this topic, and it's very interesting what they're saying here. Play this.
There that don't have criminal records. That is why this is so important, because if they could do it to them, if they could snatch students off the street without any pushback or recourse, they will do it to any of us. And to be very clear, it's going to be the people of color and vulnerable communities that are next in line.
I think that's right, and that's certainly part of why the African American community is so strongly behind the supporting Kilmar.
Yeah, we're like, we are not for this.
Yeah, because as you just said, if they're going to whisk them away, what are they going to do with us?
So there you go. This is the argument that left's making, especially African Americans on the liberal media side, is okay. They'll take these students off the streets. They'll take these gang members. They're coming after us next. Now, I'm not here to say that that's not if the wrong president's in office, and this is where it's getting to be a slippery slope, and this is what we want to pray about accordingly. This happened under the Bush term when the Patriot Act came into play because we're trying to stop terrorists. Well, the government, when it got in the wrong hands of Obama and Biden, and especially during COVID issues, they used those laws that was supposed to be toward terrorists to begin to attack Americans and survey Americans and begin to have surveillance on Americans, things like that. This is where these laws become dangerous. And so as you see this right now, her point there, I think, is ridiculous. I don't think they're going to pick up black people or anybody other races because of this. But if a bad administration's in there, you never know what can happen in that situation. And so that's the hard part about it. What they're trying to do, obviously, is get out the bad actors out of our country that have come in illegally and get them out. Okay. And obviously they're going to make some mistakes along the way and pick up the wrong people. And there's going to be some good people that are going to get, taken out, or they're going to have to go through a court case, whatever. But so this is a really slippery slope right now. We really need wisdom as we navigate through this moment, that the Trump administration would have wisdom on how to deal with this deportation issue.
Yeah, and this would be a great time to, pray for what we would call a spiritual awakening. Because the issue comes down to this, as Milton Friedman said it this way. He said, you look at a government, you look at an institution, a business, whatever, and you say that thing there is evil. Well, the reality is that thing is made up of individual people who come together around a central idea. And if there could be a spiritual awakening to get those people who are a part, say, of government to realize that these things that top down are trying to be done, there can be a rising up from bottom up to say, no, we're not going to implement this. You saw this in certain pockets of the country when it came to COVID, and not implementing some of the ridiculous laws that were happening, in saying, look, no, this is unconstitutional. We're not going to do this. Just because the government says this doesn't mean we have to do that. And that's going to be the thin line there. And that's where the only thing that's going to prevent that is, you can say, put the right person in office, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, but this is a great example. If you put the wrong person in office, how things can be taken advantage of. But if you have an awakening from the people, at the state level, at the federal level, who work inside governments, who are not going to go along with these policies, and they bring up, to a degree, certainly a legitimate point, but they go too far in saying, oh, they're going for these illegals who, one, are committing crimes, but then are also attacking innocent Americans, in promoting just a basic lie about what happened on October 7th to Israel. And so then they're saying, well, they're going to equate that to anything being done in Americans. And obviously that's an issue. There's a show called Person of Interest that was produced back in the day that can kind of play that out a little bit. And that's something to be very concerned about. Yes. But at the same time, is the only way to prevent that is if you have a spiritual awakening to where the American populace as a majority in a whole understand, hey, this is a bit too far. Let's stop this. And I think we're at a crucial point where now we can do something about that. But it's one of those things where it's like, all right, are the remnant, are we going to pray? Are we going to intercede? Are we going to get involved? Are we going to understand what's actually going on? This is where we want to pray for the hearts and minds of Americans to be awakened at this time.
So yeah, you heard our prayer cry there. So join with us in prayer as we walk through this. I think it's very, very important with all these court cases, with all this battle. Matter of fact, even on the birthright, which is probably going to go to the Supreme Court. If you don't know what the birthright law is, that basically if you're born here, like say your parents came here illegally, you were born here, they're saying you have a birthright exemption and have a right to become a citizen of the United States because you're born here. Now, President Trump was asked about that in a meeting about the possibility of going to the Supreme Court, and then what are his thoughts about the birthright bill. And this is what his statement was. I think a very interesting statement that you probably didn't expect anybody to say, but this is what he said.
The Supreme Court agreed to hear oral arguments in the case about ending birthright citizenship. How confident are you that the court will rule in your favor and allow that order to end birthright citizenship to go forward?
Well, you're just telling me that for the first time. I am so happy. I think the case has been so misunderstood. That case, birthright citizenship, is about slavery. If you look at the details of it, the signings of it, everything else, that case is all about slavery. And if you view it from that standpoint, people understand it. But for some reason, lawyers don't talk about it, the news doesn't talk about it. That's not about tourists coming in and touching a piece of sand and all of a sudden they're a citizenship. They're a citizen. That is all about slavery. And even look at the dates on which it was signed. It was right at that era, right after the Civil War. And if you look at it that way, the case is an easy case to win. And I hope the lawyers talk about birthright, citizenship, and slavery, because that's what it was all about. And it was it was meant to be positive. And they use it now instead, not for slavery, they use it for people that come into our country and they walk in and all of a sudden they become citizens and they pay a lot of money to different cartels and others. It's all about slavery, and if you look at it that way.
So that's a big statement the president makes there, that he's bringing it back to 14th Amendment issues, et cetera, that they put that in, and it made sense. You were brought here as a slave and you're born here, and then obviously slavery was abolished. They needed to have a birthright citizenship because they were brought here illegally. These people came here illegally. This is a different scenario. I don't know that he can win the case. Most analysts believe it's truly up in the air. It could go either way on that issue. I don't know. I have a little mixed emotions on that because, there's some people that have lived here, 20, 30 years. They're good citizens. They have businesses, et cetera, and now you're going to kick them out. So this is where it probably needs to be a case by case issue, but I don't know how they're going to rule. My gut feeling is they're going to allow birthright citizenship. I mean, that's my gut feeling. I think that's probably what would happen in this situation.
Yeah, the big issue that they're trying to prevent is people coming across and just letting them. And whenever you go back to
Well,
the federal,
point to the point, Zach, they'll come across pregnant.
correct,
They'll literally just cross
yeah,
the border while they're pregnant.
yeah, just so they can have U.S. citizenship. And then when you go back to the founding fathers, is they dealt with this issue a long time ago. It's just a misinterpretation of the law. As we're seeing here, Trump trying to point out, and whether this get dealt with in his lifetime or in future generations, is the reality is America is one of two out of like 100 and something, 80 something countries that only has birthright citizenship. 99% of countries, you have to go through a legal process to proving, parental citizenship to be able to gain your citizenship. So we're lagging behind that on the world stage, but then also it becomes a problem when you have a populace and government handouts and things that are happening and occurring, and you're look at California as a test case. They have all these illegals. They're handing out government welfare out the wazoo, and they've burned through their COVID cash that they had, that they were bragging about of having a surplus, and now all this USA aid and all this NGO funding is drying up because Doge is finding it on the wasteful spending, and Gavin Newsom is having a panic attack, rightfully so, because that money that was coming in that quote unquote provided him from having a surplus is being burned through right now. And so and the key thing there is that Democrats love to use California example of how it works. Well, this is proving that it doesn't, and that there's some waste, fraud, and abuse in that whole system. So there's a reality there that needs to be dealt with. But then also Americans need to understand is like, look, even when immigrants came before, they had to go through somewhat of a vetting process through Ellis Island or wherever else they came from. There was an entry point. This is something that has to be dealt with. You can't just come across the border illegally and then gain it. And a lot of times that's the issue, that people will just fly here, have their baby, and boom, they're there.
Yep.
And so that's something that needs to be dealt with. And that's not how it was meant to be originally, well before the 14th Amendment was ever amended, and that the founding fathers understood that there needed to be some actual process, because you have to come in, and this is the issue. You have to come in and say, I'm going to agree to be a citizen of a country based upon these said laws. And everywhere where you're seeing this happening, you have people who are coming in who are trying to push their own agenda, because of course they don't want to agree to whether it's the American Constitution, German, wherever they're coming in across, in Europe and in having the invasion. Australia has a great case study about this with some Africans that they let in, and how just destructive they have been, unfortunately, because they came there illegally. They were migrants. They want to bring workers in, but it just destroys the communities that they're in. And you're seeing this in Europe, where they do not care about the own laws. They come for their own purpose, their own agenda, and that we're seeing nothing different here in the
And
United
we've
States.
talked about that, about what a true immigrant is. Somebody's a sojourner, like the scripture says, don't forsake the sojourner that wants to be among you. It is back to that they want to come under the culture and the laws of that land, and they want to be a part of it. It's like when Ruth said to Naomi, may your God be my I want your God to be my God. What she's saying is, I want to serve the Lord you serve, and I want to come under the laws of him. And when you have people coming here with Islamic views or whatever views, pro Hamas views, and they do not want to adhere to the laws of the land, they do not want to assimilate to our culture, and yet we want to give them citizenship. That's an issue. You're not biblically. I think we have a stand to say that's not what a sojourner is. That's an invader that wants to invade and bring their ideology upon a land. Okay, that's just my little another soapbox there we want to be alerted with. Well, last thing today, the voter ID thing that's coming, not voter ID, real ID that's coming out. It's very controversial. You have a lot of conservatives against it. We're back to the very thing about what if we start this down this road, the slippery slope of it's going to go very deep. Now, this ID can become a national ID. Now, I don't listen to InfoWars and all that, but there was a good guest on there. I just saw the clip of it, and I want to play the clip of what the potential things that can happen with the voter ID. I'm sorry, federal ID that each state's going to have to implement, because you're not going to be able to travel without it. So let me play this clip of this. She's an expert on this. She's the president and co-founder of Citizens Council for Health Freedom. So listen to her comments about it.
Real ID is not what you think the real ID is. Most Americans are thinking this is just a standard state driver's license. And maybe before I go further, I just want to thank you, Alex, for bringing me on and letting your people know more about real ID so that they can protect themselves against what the government is trying to do here. But a lot of people think that this is just a standard state driver's license with a star on it, but it is not that at all. And you have to look back at the 2005 legislation and the fact that U.S. Senator Lamar Alexander, when it was being debated on the floor of the U.S. Senate, said this is a national identification card. We haven't told the American people about this. Perhaps we should have a full debate. But of course, they didn't do that. And Patty Murray, who's a Democrat at that very same time, was talking about how it hadn't, she hadn't voted for it, hadn't gone through the conference committee. And so she was also very uncomfortable with this. And yet, they created it. And so I think the big thing to understand is that this is a national ID card. It's a national ID system. It's not just a card. And that the plan for this is to digitize it, put it on your phone, and have remote access to it. And indeed, that is exactly what AMVA, which is the American Association for Motor Vehicle Administrators, that is what AMVA told Congress on December 5th, 2023. That's their plan. They plan to start with 2% of the Americans' cards, but their whole plan is to move us all the way to a digital ID, remotely accessible, and therefore, of course, it could be shut down. I think the other thing to know about this, which people don't understand, is what the law actually says. It's really important to know what the law says, because that's where you figure out what kind of flexibility they have, or are they just starting and they can go further? Well, yes, they're just starting and they can go further, because what the law says is that there are 3 official purposes for the Real ID card. Now, one of those official purposes is that access to nuclear facilities. Another one is access to certain federal buildings. The next one is access to commercial airlines. And that's what you're seeing now when they're saying that on May 7th, you have to have a real ID to fly, which is not true. And we can talk about that in a moment. But the thing that the law says is it's for those 3 official purposes. and any other purposes as determined by the Secretary of Homeland Security. And that means that this one person, currently Kristi Noem, would have unilateral authority to decide that, since maybe it had to be produced in order to buy a gun or to get married.
Okay, so I'll stop there. This is pretty scary for me. I travel a lot. Now, when they get a ID like this, they'll have chips in it and all this, which means when it's in your billfold or your purse, you can be tracked at all times. She made a point there that you can still travel domestically if you use your passport. And so I'm going to do that. I'm not going to get the real ID right now. I may be forced to later. We may not have a choice, but we can use our passport to travel with right now domestically. And they do want to, it makes sense that they want to get it on everybody's phone. One, they can track you better that way. Now, I think the Trump administration, what they're trying to do is by causing everybody to get this new real ID, traveling, they're going to be able to catch some of the illegals that aren't supposed to have a driver's license or want a driver's license. And so they're going to have to come in and give them information. And let me tell you, from what I've heard, you have to have serious information to get this ID. I saw a report of a lady. You have to have your social security card. You have to have your birth certificate. You have to have your old driver's license. You have to have a piece of mail that proves you live at that address. You have to have your marriage license. These are all right, because the women will change their last name, right? Because they get married in America. So they had to have all that. Well, this lady went in and she had been divorced like 30 years before, and they wouldn't give her an ID because she didn't have her first wedding certificate from her first husband, which she didn't even have. And so she had to leave the DMV and go home and then start contacting the other states she lived in, trying to procure a marriage license from 30 years prior. So it's pretty serious of what it takes to get in. And here we have laws in our land that allow you to vote without an ID. And here you are, you got to have all that information to get it. It seems like if you had your birth certificate, social security, and your driver's license, you have enough, but they want more and more information. So this is getting to be really, really crazy. And ultimately, if they do put on your device or put a chip in you or whatever, you know where we're headed with that. We're talking about a whole nother world system where you can be tracked. I think we're eventually probably gonna have to end up there anyway. We won't have a choice, but we can fight as long as we can. And I'm fighting on this one. I'm not going to get the ID. That's my personal opinion. I'm not telling you what to do. That's just my personal take on this ID issue. So we want to pray for President. Again, the title of today's topic was Mediator-in-Chief, that God would really help our president be the mediator it needs to be in the midst of all this. You do one good thing here, but it can have repercussions others. And that's in other times. That's why we're talking about the Bush administration and the Patriot Act. We're still suffering from that. Many of the people of the J6 issues, they were arrested without evidence at first because of that law. They had the right to use that law. So this is where it gets kind of weird. Now, I don't know enough about that topic to know what was right or wrong on that, but that's kind of what can happen in this situation. Well, we're out of time. Thanks for listening today. Let's pray this Isaiah 64 passage about rend the heavens, Lord, and ask that his name be known to our adversaries. We're asking for golden court cases, that God would let justice reign in our court systems, that there be no superseding of this Constitution, and that God would use our nation properly. So we thank you for being a part of this. I know we download a lot in an hour's time, but I pray that we will have that information to help you each and every day as you pray. We'll be back here tomorrow at noon, as well as our noon prayer, and then Wednesday night at 6:30 for our services, if you'd like to join us then. And check out my podcast today and this week. We'll be talking about some of these topics as well. We're especially in that 30-day window of open heavens. We're believing for that God would pray a blessing on you, that you too would be blessed that way. Well, God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.